Grace to you and peace from God our Father and Lord and Savior Jesus Christ as we have gathered in the midst of his presence here this morning. I admit it, I've been found guilty. By the court of medicine on Wednesday, there was deemed sufficient evidence to prove that I had influenza B. Now, lest any of you get all scared at this moment, I haven't been infectious since at least Thursday. But it was an interesting road, and so not only do I have the proof from the medical world, but, you have my own witness of life. As I pretty much laid there on Wednesday into early Thursday, with tissues in one hand and Lysol in the other, I was ready for the world because I really did not want my wife to catch this. And thankfully, to the gift of Tamiflu, it appears that she's not going to catch it, so that's good, at least in part. How many of you ever had Tamiflu? We're back, all right. Don't you just love going to the clinic? You got to love medical people. You just have to. Because you go in and they say, this is what you have, and here's what we'd like to do for you, but I do need to tell you the kinds of things that can go wrong. It's not the norm, but and then they do, and it really was kind of funny. And I think, in a way, this was a person I never met before, and I might have been a little too funny for her, but, sometimes I'm like that. And she goes, well, yes, side effects can be vomiting and diarrhea. And I go, one at a time is okay, but at both at the same time, that seems really problematic. And she said, well, you can read this. And I go, how can I read it? No, never mind. But then she went on to further potential side effects. Did you know with Tamiflu, you can get hallucinations? At least that's what the leprechaun told me. There you go. Well, thankfully, I really didn't get, honestly, any of those side effects. That was good. And between the fact that I had gotten the flu shot and this Tamiflu, certainly by Thursday noon, I was no longer infectious. But it was interesting to think about that as I was in my head preparing to look at this issue of Jesus and alongside of our own culture, how we feel about being deemed guilty. In our culture, we feel very keenly that you're innocent until proven guilty. But then, in recent days, of course, we have been dealing with women who are purported to have experiences of sexual torment from the males in their lives. And how do you deal with that? For the longest time, we have said, you got he said, she said, and, if there is no more evidence beyond that, how do you prove it? Well, it seems at this point in time we've said, if there's a preponderance of women who have come together and said, yes, concerning this one male individual, we all agree he's done this kind of stuff, well then, guilt is pretty likely. It is fascinating that we will be looking at, really starting since last week, Holy Week texts until we get to Easter. And Holy Week really is only about one thing. Is Jesus guilty? And it basically is Jesus guilty of something? Is there something we can find that he's guilty of? Is he guilty of being a Messiah imposter? Is he guilty of claiming to be God? That was really the one big one for these people, the Jewish leaders, because Jesus claimed to forgive sins, and their understanding was fully that only God could forgive sins. So while Jesus never comes down and goes, hi, I'm Jesus, and I'm God, Son of God, where he really never said that, he just kept forgiving people, which was essentially saying that exact same thing. Or is he guilty of inciting a revolt against Rome? Those are the things that are at play here. In our culture, it has been interesting to me, I think, as I look at it from the United States perspective, that unless you say otherwise, as long as you reference God somehow, we assume you're a Christian. And there was this letter to the editor that was now some weeks ago before we're dealing with the more recent things concerning the governor. And you do know the governor is Jewish, right? If you don't, then I really don't think you should be voting because you're not very much aware. And so this woman wrote in, and I'm assuming it was in the context that, yes, the governor promoted the prayer breakfast or whatever, and talks about God from time to time. And so she said, you know, you really need to appreciate our governor because he's such a fine Christian man. And I go, well, that's really interesting because he's a Jew. And he talks about that quite often. This assumption that if you talk about God in our culture, it's not unlike how we are more familiar, I think, and maybe can step back with some objectivity, in Israel. You know, if you're an Israeli, you're a Jew. Just that kind of assumption. You're like born into it. It's a personal kind of identity. And it's interesting, through the years, they actually have made some distinctions in that there now actually are certain types of people who are defined as secular Jews as opposed to those who are not. And in a sense, we have that same thing in the United States. That, yeah, you talk about God, well, you're a Christian. And we ran into that problem, and I think it really is important for us to hold on to that it really has been from the start, with our own founding fathers, that every scholar agrees they really were not Christian. You can't call them Christian. The theological term is deist. In a layperson's term, the closest thing we have in our day that would align with that type of theology is Jehovah's Witness. They did not believe that Jesus was God, for the most part, those folks. And so you have this ongoing kind of sense of developing culture and Christianity that just got enmeshed. A fairly well-known pastor one time kind of referenced this to this question of what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? Can you be found guilty of following Jesus? Is there enough evidence to convict you if it were a crime? And this fellow, he was about to go into a worship setting, and there was another guy that came up to him and said, wow, yeah, there's just a great crowd. And the pastor goes, yeah, about a couple hundred Christians. And the guy goes, no. There are like 2,000 people or so out there. And he goes, yeah, and about 200 of them are Christians. Well, that was an interesting theological perspective that this guy was foisting upon the assumptions of these people, right or wrong. But it got to that point. You know, I like to reference what I call my buddy, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian from World War II time, because I consider him a prophet in that he really saw where Western culture was going at a time that is now, you know, basically 100 years ago. And the term that he developed as in cheap grace. And understanding that basically, if I just say I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, I'm a Christian. Bam. That's it. No more, no less. I'm going to heaven. Are we confident that that's really all there is to it? That's the question before us. Or is there something else beyond that? Are there other kinds of pieces of evidence? Because you've got this Jesus who is teaching all the time about, well, you know, I'm going to take up my cross, you're going to need to take up your cross. Those who want to be great have to serve. The first will be last, and the last will be first. Time and time again, Jesus is saying that the ways of God are absolutely the opposite of the assumptions of human logic and reason. And how are you going to deal with that? So, it wouldn't be so bad if it were not for the fact that there are eternal ramifications here. And that's the threat. I mean, honestly, that's why I preach on this, because it's not clear to us. Where exactly is that line? Because we follow this God who is of grace. Our salvation is by his grace alone. We know that. Then you've got, of course, that book of James that Martin Luther was not too crazy about, that says faith without works is dead. Where is that? Where is that line? How can we be confident that we are on that eternal path is basically the story. So you've got Jesus, he's on trial. You know, I do. I love the politics of the Bible. And I think you should love politics too. just in the sense of that politics done right is an art form. It is the process of trying to find a way forward in the bringing together of human community. And that, yeah, granted, that's difficult to do. But done rightly, done well, it's important stuff. And that's what's happening here. And it's a powerful political story, one that really shows all the little idiosyncrasies of human endeavor, including those places where, when push comes to shove, we can become manipulative and things like that. So, if only Jesus had not gone to Jerusalem, none of this would have happened. And of course, Jesus knew that, which is what sends him to Jerusalem. But for us to understand that, if Jesus had just stayed out meandering, in Samaria and places on the outskirts, there was word on the street about this guy who claims to be the Messiah. He can do some miracles, but there were lots of people claiming to be the Messiah. There were other people who actually could even do miracles. So, whatever. You got Caiaphas, the high priest. I'm pretty sure he didn't care anything about this Jesus. Not until he had to come into town. And he puts on this big parade, with Palm Sunday, the people waving their palms and throwing the coats down as they do for kings that are coming into town. From Caiaphas' perspective, Jesus has no one to blame but himself. And then he puts on this ruckus at the temple. Could he have not just let these things go? But no, Jesus has to call attention to himself. He has to basically spit in the face of the religious and governmental leaders, which the likes of Caiaphas would have been fine if Jesus would have said, yep, I'm here, I'm the king of the Jews, I'm the Messiah, and we're going to kick out those Romans. Who's with me? And they go, yeah, okay, let's do it. No! You have this Jesus who says, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. Peter, he lops off the ear of one of the people coming to arrest Jesus, and Jesus says, no, put your sword back. Those who live by the sword are going to die by the sword. Jesus is the most nonviolent person you've ever seen. He's the last person that's going to kick out the Romans. And so I really do get Caiaphas. It makes total human sense. I don't care about this Jesus. Seems like a nondescript enough guy. Doesn't bother anybody. But the problem is the people are gathering all around him. They think that he's going to be the one who rids us from the Romans. But clearly he's not. And so now the Romans are going to get wind of it, and they're going to come in and just lay waste to us. We have this tenuous relationship going on here where, okay, they're in control, but they basically let us do whatever we want to do as long as we don't threaten their power. No. It's better if one person like Jesus dies than for all of us to die. I get that. Caiaphas, from his perspective, from a human perspective, was absolutely right. But there's a problem. The Jews, with their lack of power, couldn't execute anyone. Only the Romans could. So you go back to what the Jewish leaders have a problem with is that Jesus is claiming to be the Messiah, but he's not going to kick out the Romans. He says, oh, I've got this spiritual kingdom. Ugh. And worse than that, then, he's blasphemous. He claims to be God. We can't have that going around. But if we take him to Pilate, the Roman governor, and say, we don't like his theology, Pilate's going to go, I'm going back to my soap operas. Just go away. So we have to come up with something here. Well, here it is. Our concern should be Pilate's concern. Because if Jesus keeps going like this, the people are going to rally around him, and Rome's going to assume that there's a revolt coming through Jesus. So that's what we're going to tell Pilate, that he needs to crucify Jesus because he's inciting a revolt. Okay, we got it. Take Jesus to Pilate. Pilate! Here's a bad man. kind of historically, we have said the two people hanging on crosses alongside of Jesus were robbers. I don't know quite necessarily where we got that. More contemporary scholarship suggests insurrectionists. And that makes sense, at least, because all the Romans really cared about was, are you trying to take away our power? Otherwise, go do what you want to do. And particularly to you Jews, if somebody robs somebody of something, just take care of it, whatever. So they got to figure out a crime that Pilate will agree to find Jesus guilty that's worthy of executing him. Pilate takes a look at Jesus, goes, he says, love your enemies. He says, I'm not here to take on Rome. Here, take him back. I give one back. Surely you want him. No, we'll take Barabbas instead. Crucify Jesus. Pilate's going, you people are weird. And so Caiaphas and friends come in and they say, Mr. Pilate, oh, great leader that you are, what would your boss think? The Caesar back in Rome? If he got word from us that you were going easy on a potential revolt situation here in little old Israel, I don't think he would be too happy about that, do you? And Pilate goes, fine, kill him. Well, now you got the subplot that we focused in on in the reading. This Peter guy. I love John. He's so human. I'd really kind of forgotten that he tells this little extra stuff. He's always throwing in extras, like that he can run faster than Peter and all this kind of stuff. So today it was, I am known by the high priest. The high priest really kind of likes me, I'm important, not like Peter. Peter is unknown to the religious leaders. And so I walk in with Jesus, which is also interesting for him to say, it would seem to me, to be that, Peter, he's going to deny Jesus 3 times. I didn't. I walked in, I said, yep, I'm with Jesus. Here I am. And it was interesting. We don't ever really talk about that. And so finally, he goes, okay, Peter, you'd like to come in, wouldn't you? Well, here you go, Peter. I'll let you in into the main gate of where all the trial is taking place. And you really have this question. Peter is now on trial as well. Is Peter a Christian? Is really the question. Jesus had said, Peter, I love you, but you just need to understand, when things get rough, you're going to deny me, you're going to say you don't know me, that you don't have any part of me, actually 3 times during the night. And then it'll be morning and the rooster will crow. No, Jesus, I will never do that. I will fight and die for you, Jesus. Yeah, I know that you think that, Peter, and you mean that. But human nature is such that when really push comes to shove, sometimes our self-defense mechanisms kick in. No. So yeah, throughout the night, as this is evolving, and you have to be careful. There is no place for us to condemn in this. Rather, for us to appreciate and to whatever way in which we can enter into the sandals of Peter. Have you ever been in a place where you felt so confronted? This was a life and death situation for Peter. He had every reason to believe that they were going to kill Jesus and likely kill anyone else that was associated with him. And so 3 times he's accosted by people. Yeah, I really think I'm sure you're with it. You're a Galilean, you don't even from these here parts. Peter goes, no. And the rooster crows. And if you've ever had those kinds of moments, where in the heat of the moment, you're just going zoom. And then, in a sense, whatever it is, the rooster crows, calling you back to consciousness. And you go, oh, man. That was the moment for Peter. It was a harsh lesson. It's a harsh lesson for us. If being a Christian were illegal, is there evidence to convict us? Jesus will follow up after the resurrection. He goes, Peter, you love me? Peter goes, yeah, you betcha, Jesus, I love you. Always have, always will. Peter, do you love me? Jesus, yes, I love you. I just said so. Evidently, we need to clear some wax out of your ears. Peter, do you love me? A third time. Now Peter gets it. 3 times. Just like those blasted denials. Well, I was hoping Jesus would never bring this up. Couldn't we just let bygones be bygones? Jesus, you know I love you. Then what happens? Does Jesus say, bad little Peter, say you're sorry, and I will forgive you, because I forgive? Notice, he doesn't say that. He doesn't condemn in any way whatsoever. I find that compelling and important to notice. Because Jesus understands. He understood particularly well ever since those first temptations from Satan that happened now 3 years ago. He understands what it is to be human. He understands how fragile we are, how broken we are, and how honestly incapable at some level we are to fully follow God. And so this wasn't about tricking Peter, tripping him up. This was the only way Peter could learn the lesson he had to learn, because life was going to get tougher, if you can possibly believe that, from here on. And Peter needed to fully understand. When Jesus said, taking up a cross and following me, he really meant that. When he said, the first will be last and last will be first, that those who want to be great have to serve, that there is real personal threat here involved. There is risk involved in following Jesus. That these weren't just analogies from Jesus. It was literal. And Peter understands that now. And he's ready from this moment onward to be the person Jesus needs him to be, to lead and institute the church. So that's the lesson for all of us, you know. These harsh moments that we would really rather not experience. But those are the teaching moments when God continually prepares us for whatever the next step is, because the next step is probably harder than the last step. Just is. And so this step, as hard as it is, gives us the courage, the boldness, the wisdom, the experience to be ready for the next step. So yeah, the question is before us. As you go through your week ahead, how is God calling you to be like Peter? Because the answer that Peter got from Jesus, instead of condemnation, instead of saying, you're sorry, Peter, was, Peter, take care of my sheep. If you love me, you will protect my sheep. Fascinating. That's how Peter is supposed to show his love for Jesus, is by taking care of whatever sheep Jesus puts in his care. And so for me, that is where we find our walking papers today. As you go out into the world this week ahead, what are the ways in which God is looking for you to tend his sheep, to protect his precious people? What does that look like? And yeah, in our current scenario, all sorts of things come to mind. Okay. as you move through this week ahead? How is it that there will be times where you will have the opportunity to provide such a witness that, yes, you could be, if you will, convicted? There is a preponderance of evidence that you are a follower of Jesus, that you are a Christian.